Vikings were fearsome warriors known for attacking nations and brutalizing their populations. These ferocious seafaring Scandinavians slayed many and carried out brutal ceremonial executions. Let's dig through the archaeological shreds of evidence and uncover bizarre Viking traditions you didn't know about. The Viking period was filled with severe Norse religious ceremonies and a few quirky rituals that Vikings performed exclusively. Hold on to your chairs and get a roller coaster ride through the Viking Age. Draugr and Hagbui were the Viking versions of zombies today. It was thought that his corpse would incarnate once a person was buried. The Hagbui would dwell in peace in its barrow, guarding its burial goods against tomb thieves. In comparison, a Draugr would leave its barrow and attack any people it could find. Utmost care was taken before burying a dead Viking to avoid this. Straw would be put in the crosses beneath the shroud, and a pair of open scissors would be laid across the chest. The deceased's big toes were tied together, preventing him from walking, and nails were forced into the soles of his feet. When carrying the coffin out of the house, the bearers would pause before stepping out of the door to lower and raise the coffin 3 times in various directions, forming a cross. The dead individuals were often transported out of a house through a special corpse door, a bricked-up hole in the wall. It would be cut open to remove the corpse and then sealed again. Vikings believed that the dead could only return from the same door they were carried for cremation. This way, the deceased could not enter the house if they returned. The deceased would also be carried out feet first, making it impossible to identify their path to the burial mound. When the coffin was removed from the house, all of the deceased's jars, saucepans, chairs, and stools were flipped upside down. If the dead were buried in a graveyard, the parson was supposed to use magic words to tie the dead to their graves. Quite interesting, right? Vikings are famous for their fighting ferocity, and nothing was more fearsome than their berserkers and ulfhednar. Both were created through shamanistic combat rites, although they had distinct totem animals. Berserkers were the bear men who wore bearskins, whereas ulfhednar were the wolf men who wore wolf hides. These guys would go to combat wearing nothing but animal furs and heads, fighting with their naked fists and fangs rather than weapons and shields. Others would become so agitated that they would begin biting down on their shields. They too felt no pain and continued to battle after being severely injured. To get to this point in warfare, they had to first join the ranks of their fellow warriors. To do this, they would live in the wild similar to their totem animals. This would deprive them of their humanity and let them take on their animal's vigor. Exposure to intense heat, ceremonial weapon dances, and fasting was likely among the ways to achieve the frantic condition they were famed for on the battlefield. This might put them into a self-induced hypnotic trance, causing them to lose their perception of pain and conscious control over their motions. It has also been suggested that they used hallucinogenic mushrooms or a toxic fungus to induce madness before the battle, something incredible that only these frenzy Vikings could think of. The blot was a sacrifice performed to obtain the favor of the gods. These rites were performed in large groups on the estate of the local chief, who served as a priest throughout the occasion. A blot was celebrated 4 times a year near the winter, spring, summer, and fall. Blot was also celebrated during difficult times such as drought. The local farmers would gather at the temple, slaughter many animals, principally horses, and prepare the flesh. Twigs were used to spray blood from the animals and on the humans. Yak. Literally awkward. This didn't end here either. The chief blessed the cooked meat and glasses of beer. They toasted Odin and other gods while drinking beer. Vikings sacrificed infant girls to their pagan gods as part of their religious practices. Furthermore, because the Vikings were often away from home, there was a greater danger of adultery. Because the Vikings murdered so many baby girls, gender balances were thrown off. As a result of this imbalance, during the Viking Age, European women were kidnapped and carried to Scandinavia. A few rituals were performed when a baby was born for the newborn to be considered human. Before this, the newborn was not considered a human being, most likely as a mechanism for adults to protect themselves emotionally due to the high infant death rate. He was left on the ground when the baby was born until his father scooped him up and placed him under his coat. This represented the father's acceptance of the newborn as his kid. The father then examined the baby. If the infant had any issues, he would be left to die. If he was healthy, they would execute a ritual in which they showered water over the newborn. Swedish kings would sacrifice men in the temple of Uppsala every 9th year. The bodies would be hung in the temple's sacred grove while 9 heads were offered to the gods. It continued for 9 days, resulting in 81 sacrifices accompanied by feasts and Yule celebrations. This custom was followed to thank Odin and ensure success in the next year. Previously, people appeased the gods by slaughtering a huge number of cattle. They sacrificed a gang of criminals or slaves at Uppsala Temple when that failed. They once offered a king, covering the altar in his blood and blaming him for the terrible drought. The cremation ceremony of a Viking chief was something out of this world. After a chief died, one of his slave girls was compelled to accompany him in the afterlife. A distressing ceremony had to take place beforehand for her to do so. While the cremation ritual was being prepared, the slave girl was repeatedly inebriated with various beverages to get her high. She was then compelled to participate in sexual rites and have intercourse with every guy in the town before being strangled. The village heads then strangled her, placing her body on a wooden ship with the Viking chiefs. The vessel was then lit on fire and thrown out to sea. This ensured that she would serve her master in the hereafter for all eternity. It was the Viking method of changing the chieftain's life force. This seems to be one of the most gruesome and out-of-the-world rituals of the Vikings. These Vikings were so mean that they killed innocent slaves to be buried with their masters or just to please their gods. Slaves were one of the most suffering classes in the Viking society. The blood eagle is depicted in Norse mythology as a ritualized type of execution, a sacrifice to the deity Odin. Torturous executions were often reserved for punishing dishonorable persons or exacting vengeance on a grave enemy. The rite began with the victim being restrained face down while the form of an eagle with its wings extended was sliced into his back. Each rib was methodically detached from the spine with a sharp tool. After detaching all of the ribs, they were dragged outward to create the illusion of bulging wings. While the victim was still alive and in pain, his lungs were extracted from the gaping hole. His lungs were then placed over his wings drawn, creating the illusion that his wings fluttered as the victim breathed his final breaths and died. Unbelievable. Only a wild beast could do or witness anything like this. The blood eagle was regarded as the most heinous manner of death in human history. These were the most bizarre Viking traditions you might not have heard of. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked the video, check out other historical videos on our channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you don't miss out on such interesting topics.